I volunteered to stay behind during a heavy winter storm while the rest of my family drove 2 hours south to stay with relatives who had a generator. I was 27 at the time, working remotely, and figured I could handle a couple of nights alone. Our house sat at the edge of a rural neighborhood where the streets ended and thick woods began. It wasn't isolated enough to be considered remote, but it was quiet in a way that made you very aware of being alone. By late afternoon, snow was already piling up, the sky dull and heavy, and the wind pushing flakes sideways across the yard. My parents left just before dark, and once their taillights disappeared, the house felt larger and emptier than usual. The first few hours passed without incident. I cooked dinner, answered emails, and watched the storm through the front windows. Snow muffled everything outside, absorbing sound until the world felt wrapped in cotton. Around 8 p.m., the power flickered once but stayed on. I remember feeling relieved, thinking I'd lucked out. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and turned on extra lamps so the house wouldn't feel so hollow. At around 9:30, I heard a faint click from somewhere below me. It was subtle, like the sound of a switch being flipped. I paused the TV and listened. The furnace hummed steadily. The house was otherwise silent. I told myself it was probably the heating system cycling or something settling because of the cold. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound had been too deliberate. A few minutes later, I noticed a faint glow spilling into the hallway from the stairwell leading down to the basement. That's when my stomach tightened. The basement light was on. I was absolutely certain I hadn't turned it on earlier. I rarely went down there at night, especially during storms. The basement wasn't finished, just concrete floors, storage shelves, and an old workbench. Seeing that light on felt wrong in a way that was hard to explain. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring down into the yellowish glow. The stairs creaked slightly as the house shifted in the wind, but I didn't hear movement. I called out, half joking, half serious, asking if anyone was down there. My voice echoed back to me, thin and unconvincing. No response. After a long moment, I leaned over and flicked the switch at the top of the stairs. The basement light went off, plunging the space below into darkness. I went back to the living room, trying to laugh it off. The storm outside was intensifying, snow slamming against the windows and wind howling through the trees. I told myself I was just on edge because I was alone and the weather was bad. That made sense. I turned the TV back on and forced myself to focus on it. Around 10:25, the power went out. This time, it was complete. The lamps went dark, the TV shut off, and the furnace stopped mid-hum. The sudden silence was jarring. I sat there for a second, my eyes adjusting, then reached for my phone's flashlight. The storm outside was loud now, branches cracking and snow hitting the siding. I sent a quick text to my parents, letting them know the power was out, then stood up to light a few candles. As I walked toward the kitchen, I noticed something that made my breath catch. The faint glow from the basement stairwell was back. The light was on again. I stood there, staring at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. The power was out. There was no way that light should have been on. I slowly walked closer, shining my phone's flashlight down the stairs. The basement light was definitely on, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. I could see the shelves, the workbench, and the back wall clearly. I didn't go down. I backed away and locked myself in the living room, pushing a chair against the door, even though I knew it wouldn't really stop anyone. I called the non-emergency police line, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what was happening. They told me officers would come by when conditions allowed, but warned that response times were delayed because of the storm. While I was on the phone, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming from the basement stairs. They stopped just short of the door at the top. I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound. The dispatcher asked if I was still there. I whispered yes. Then the footsteps turned away. I heard them move across the basement ceiling, pacing back and forth, as if whoever it was deciding what to do next. Every creak of the floorboards above them felt amplified. I crouched behind the couch, clutching my phone, barely breathing. Minutes passed like that, stretched thin by fear. At some point, the basement light went off again, plunging the house into complete darkness. I didn't relax. I stayed there, frozen, listening to the storm and the faint noises of the house settling. I don't know how long passed before I heard the back door creak open. The sound was unmistakable, the slow groan of hinges that needed oil. Cold air rushed into the house, carrying the sharp scent of snow. I heard footsteps move through the kitchen, then fade. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to move. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weak. I locked myself in the upstairs bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser, and stayed there until morning. I didn't sleep at all. At first light, the storm had died down. Snow covered everything in a thick, uneven blanket. I crept downstairs and checked the back door. It was unlocked. There were footprints in the snow leading from the woods to the door, and another set leading away. They were deep and uneven, like someone had been moving carefully but quickly. The police arrived a few hours later. They searched the house and the basement, and what they found made my skin crawl. Behind one of the storage shelves in the basement, there was a small cleared area with a sleeping bag, empty food containers, and a battery-powered lantern. The basement light switch had been rewired to a backup battery source. Someone had been staying there, using the storm and the power outage as cover. The officers said it was likely the person had been hiding in the basement for days, maybe longer, entering and exiting through the back door when no one was home. My family leaving had given them the opportunity to move around more freely. Turning the basement light on might have been a mistake, or a way to see if anyone else was in the house. I left that day and didn't come back until my parents returned. Even now, years later, I can't be in a house alone during a storm without checking every light, every lock, every shadow. The idea that someone was down there, listening to me move around upstairs when I thought I was alone, still keeps me up at night.
I agreed to house sit for my uncle over a long weekend in early winter. He lived in a quiet development about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place built all at once where every house looks similar and the streets curve in confusing loops. Most of the homes were occupied by older couples who went to bed early and didn't make much noise. My uncle was traveling overseas and didn't want to leave the place completely unattended, so I packed a bag and stayed there from Friday night to Monday morning. I didn't mind. The house was big, warm, and comfortable, and I figured it would be a relaxing break from my small apartment. The first night was uneventful. I ordered food, watched TV in the living room, and eventually went to sleep in the guest bedroom on the second floor. The house made the usual noises, heating vents ticking, floorboards shifting, but nothing out of the ordinary. I woke up Saturday feeling rested and spent most of the day inside since it was freezing outside and lightly snowing. By evening, the neighborhood felt almost abandoned. I didn't see a single car pass by for hours, and the only lights on were a few houses down the street. Around 9 p.m., I locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and settled in for the night. The living room had large windows facing the backyard, which opened onto a stretch of trees separating the neighborhood from an empty field. During the day, it looked peaceful. At night, it was just a wall of black. I closed the blinds, turned on a few lamps, and sat on the couch watching a movie. About halfway through, I heard a noise that made me pause it. It sounded like something sliding across the hardwood floor upstairs. Not a loud crash, just a slow, deliberate scrape. I sat still, listening. The house went quiet again. I figured it was probably the heating system or something shifting as the temperature dropped. Old houses make weird sounds, especially in winter. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was followed by a soft thud, like something being set down. I felt that familiar unease creep in, the kind you get when you're alone in a place that isn't really yours. I muted the TV and listened harder. Nothing else happened. After a while, I convinced myself I was just psyching myself out and turned the movie back on.
I didn't make it another 10 minutes before I noticed something else. The hallway light at the bottom of the stairs was off. I was almost certain I'd left it on. I always did, especially in an unfamiliar house. I stared at the dark stairway, trying to remember if I'd turned it off earlier without thinking. I told myself I probably had. Still, I didn't like the idea of walking up there in the dark, so I turned on another lamp in the living room and left the hallway light alone. The movie ended just after 11 o'clock. I shut everything off and stood up, stretching, when I heard a faint sound again, this time unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, careful steps coming from upstairs. They weren't heavy and they weren't rushing. Whoever it was clearly trying to be quiet. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I listened as the steps moved across the second floor, stopped, then continued toward the stairs. I backed away from the base of the staircase and grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Seconds felt like minutes. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing at the top of the stairs, listening to me just like I was listening to them. I whispered my uncle's name, even though I knew he was thousands of miles away. No response. After what felt like forever, I heard the steps move again, away from the stairs this time. They retreated deeper into the second floor, then faded into silence. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run out the front door and drive away, but another part of me worried I was imagining everything and didn't want to overreact. I locked myself in the downstairs bathroom and called a friend, trying to sound calm while explaining what I'd heard. He suggested I leave immediately. I told him I was probably just tired. We talked for a few minutes until I felt slightly more grounded, then I hung up and decided to grab my keys and go. As I stepped back into the living room, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the blinds covering the backyard window was slightly open. I knew I'd closed all of them earlier. I walked closer and peeked through the gap. The yard was empty, but there were fresh footprints in the snow near the back of the house, leading toward the trees. I didn't wait anymore. I grabbed my coat and keys and headed for the front door. That's when I heard a voice upstairs. It was low and calm, almost conversational, like someone talking on the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell it was a man's voice. He wasn't shouting or panicking. He sounded comfortable. I stood there, terrified, realizing that whoever was in the house hadn't left. He'd just moved to a place where I couldn't see or hear him clearly. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, every tiny click sounding impossibly loud. As I opened it, the voice stopped. The house went completely silent. I didn't look back. I ran outside, jumped into my car, and locked the doors before my hands had even stopped shaking. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced up at the second-floor window. A light was on. A shadow moved behind the curtain, just for a second, before it disappeared. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. I waited down the street, watching as they went inside with flashlights. They searched the entire house, inside and out. When they came back, they told me they hadn't found anyone, but they did find something unsettling. One of the upstairs bedrooms, one my uncle never used, had signs that someone had been staying there. A sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a space heater plugged in. There were no signs of forced entry. The officer said it was possible the person had entered days earlier and had been hiding in the house while my uncle was gone, only moving around when they thought no one was home. My staying there had probably disrupted whatever routine they'd established. I didn't stay another night. My uncle installed new locks, cameras, and an alarm system when he got back, but I still can't shake the thought that someone had been living quietly above me, listening, watching, waiting for the right moment. And the worst part is knowing how easily I might have gone upstairs to check the noise, never realizing I wasn't alone at all.
I live alone in a small apartment building on the edge of the city. It's not a sketchy place or anything, just older. 4 floors, no elevator, Thick concrete walls and hallways that always smell faintly like dust and cleaning chemicals. I'd been there for almost 3 years without a single problem. No break-ins, no weird neighbors, nothing worth remembering. That night started completely normal. It was a Tuesday in early fall, already dark by 7. I'd just gotten home from work, reheated leftovers, and settled onto the couch with my laptop. Rain had been coming down on and off all evening, tapping against the windows in that steady, calming way. I remember thinking it was the perfect night to do nothing. Around 9:30, the power went out. Not just a flicker, everything shut off at once. The TV, the lamps, the hum of the refrigerator. The rain outside suddenly sounded louder without the background noise of electricity. I checked my phone and saw I still had service, but no alerts about outages yet. I wasn't too worried. Power outages happened occasionally in this part of town, especially during storms. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and lit a candle on the coffee table. The apartment felt smaller in the dark, the corners deeper and heavier. That was when I heard the first sound. It was subtle, almost easy to ignore. A dull thump from somewhere above me, like someone shifting their weight or dropping something. I assumed it was my upstairs neighbor. The building wasn't exactly soundproof. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it sounded closer to the hallway outside my apartment door. A slow, dragging noise, like something being brushed along the wall. I paused the video I was watching and listened. Nothing. I told myself I was just more aware because the power was out. Every building makes noises, especially old ones. Pipes settling, people moving around. Still, I stood up and checked the peephole in my door. The hallway was completely dark. Usually, there were emergency lights that stayed on during outages, but they were off too. Just a long, black corridor stretching in both directions. I didn't see or hear anyone. I locked the deadbolt anyway. About 20 minutes passed. I sat back down, scrolling on my phone, trying to distract myself. The rain had picked up, and thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Then I heard footsteps. Clear this time, slow, deliberate. They weren't coming from above or below. They were in the hallway. Each step echoed softly, like the person was wearing heavy shoes and walking carefully, not rushing, not stumbling, just walking. I froze, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stared at the handle, waiting for it to move. Nothing happened for several seconds, long enough that my heart started pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. Then I heard a quiet click. Not the sound of my door opening, but someone trying another door nearby. Then another click. Whoever was out there was checking doors, slowly, methodically. I backed away from the door and picked up my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. Before the call connected, the footsteps started again. They moved past my apartment, continuing down the hall. I hung up, telling myself not to overreact. Maybe it was a neighbor trying to see if anyone else had power. Maybe maintenance. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. No one casually checks apartment doors in the dark during a storm. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, my phone buzzed with a notification. The power outage was reported, estimated restoration time unknown. I sighed, some of the tension easing out of my body. I was starting to feel stupid for getting worked up. That's when I heard it again. This time, it came from inside my apartment. A faint sound from the back, near the bedroom, like fabric brushing against fabric. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly across the floor. I held the flashlight out in front of me, sweeping the beam across the living room. Everything looked normal. I slowly walked toward the bedroom, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door was open,
I never leave it open. I stopped just short of the doorway and shined the light inside. The bed was untouched. The closet door was slightly ajar, but it always sticks and never closes properly. I told myself that explained it. Then I noticed something on the floor. Wet footprints. Not full prints, like partial ones, like someone with soaked shoes had stepped onto the carpet and moved carefully, trying not to leave too much behind. They led from the bedroom toward the bathroom. My stomach dropped. I didn't go any farther. I backed away, locked myself in the living room. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, I heard a soft creak from behind me. The bathroom door opening. I didn't turn around. I just stared at the front door, my vision blurring as the dispatcher told me officers were on their way. I could hear breathing now, slow, controlled, close enough that I knew they were in the same room. Then the breathing stopped. Footsteps moved away from me, heading toward the kitchen. I heard a window slide open. Cold air rushed in. A second later, the sound of running, splashes against wet pavement outside. When the police arrived, they found the bathroom window unlocked and smeared with mud. The footprints inside my apartment matched the mud from the alley behind the building. What they didn't find was forced entry. No broken locks, no damaged windows. Whoever was in had been inside my apartment before the power ever went out. The officer told me something that still makes my skin crawl. During outages, the building's electronic door system resets. Anyone already inside can move freely without needing key access, which means the person checking doors in the hallway wasn't trying to get in. They were trying to make sure no one else was home. I didn't stay there that night. I moved out 2 weeks later. And even now, when the power flickers or the lights go out unexpectedly, I don't feel alone anymore, because I know how easily someone can already be there, waiting in the dark.